This school's for real scholars, not diversity hires. Football star Grant Wheeler sneers, shoving Amara Ami Cole, a black honors student, against the lockers at elite Sterling Academy. It's 5 minutes before her calculus quiz, the pressure mounting alongside weeks of racist microaggressions. Ami snaps. In one fluid motion learned not in class but for survival, she flips the much larger bully onto the gym floor. Phones are out, recording instantly. The crowd is stunned silent. She fought back, but will the school see self-defense or fulfill that angry black girl stereotype? This single act ignites a firestorm of protests, exposes deep bias, and forces Ami to make a life-altering choice. Watch the story unfold. Amara Ami Cole adjusted her gelly as she walked down the polished marble hallway of Sterling Academy. It was a small ritual, tying the Nigerian headwrap tightly before every test, but today felt different. Her fingers trembled slightly as they traced the edges of the fabric, tucking stray strands of hair beneath its folds. She whispered her mother's words under her breath, "You are not a quota." The bell rang, echoing through the cavernous halls like a countdown to something inevitable. Ami quickened her pace toward her locker, clutching her calculus book and calculator against her chest. She needed 5 more minutes to review one last problem set before the quiz. But then came the shove. Her back hit the cold metal of the locker with a thud, books spilling from her arms. Grant Wheeler loomed over her, his varsity jacket stretched across broad shoulders. His lips curled into a sneer that made Ami's stomach churn. "This school's for real scholars," he said, leaning closer until his voice dropped low enough for only her to hear. "Not diversity hires." For a moment, Ami froze. Her vision blurred at the edges, panic clawing its way up her throat. She could feel the weight of all the microaggressions, the sideways glances in class, the whispers about how she must have gotten in because of affirmative action, crashing down on her. And now this. This blatant dismissal of everything she had worked for. Grant took a step back, smirking, clearly expecting her to shrink away. But instead, something inside Ami snapped. She didn't think. She acted. With precision born of years watching her younger brother Kai practice martial arts, Ami planted her foot firmly behind Grant's heel and yanked him forward by the collar of his jersey. He stumbled, flailing, and landed flat on his back on the gym floor with a loud thud. The crowd gasped. Dozens of eyes turned to stare, at Ami standing there breathing hard, her fists clenched, at Grant sprawled out like a fallen colossus. For a split second, time seemed to stop. Then someone started filming. Later, when Ami replayed the moment in her mind, she couldn't explain what had possessed her. Maybe it was the exhaustion of carrying so much alone, the pressure to excel academically while pretending she wasn't drowning, the constant battle against stereotypes designed to box her in. Or maybe it was simply the unbearable weight of knowing that no matter how hard she tried, people like Grant would always see her as less than. Whatever it was, it changed everything. By the time she reached the bathroom stall after the fight, her hands were shaking again, not from fear this time, but from adrenaline. She locked the door behind her and slid down the wall, clutching her knees to her chest. Her heart pounded wildly, each beat reverberating in her ears like the school bell earlier. That damn bell, always ringing, always reminding her of deadlines, expectations, failures waiting just around the corner. It wasn't supposed to be like this. When her mother first told her about Sterling Academy, a prestigious private school with an abolitionist history, Ami had imagined herself thriving there. She'd picture walking these grand halls alongside other brilliant minds, contributing to debates in classrooms filled with natural light. But reality was far harsher. Here, being black meant existing as both invisible and hypervisible, ignored in discussions yet scrutinized for every move you made. You were either too quiet or too loud, too meek or too aggressive. Never just right. And now? Now she was a spectacle. Students whispered about her wherever she went, pointing phones in her direction as if she were some kind of sideshow attraction. Even teachers looked at her differently, their expressions hovering somewhere between pity and disapproval. Ami pulled out her calculator, the one her mother gave her, and stared at the engraving, "You are not a quota." Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring the letters. How could those words still sting so much? That evening, as she sat cross-legged on her bed scrolling through social media, Ami realized the full extent of what had happened. Videos of the fight were everywhere. Some praised her as a hero, others called her violent and ungrateful. Comments ranged from supportive, "Go off, sis," to vicious, "This is why affirmative action doesn't work." Her phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. A group chat message popped up from her best friend, Nia. "OMG Ami, did you see this?" Attached was a meme of Grant lying flat on the ground with the caption, "When you mess W the wrong Nigerian queen." Ami laughed despite herself, but the sound quickly turned into a sob. This wasn't funny. None of it was. She hadn't fought back to become a viral sensation or prove anything to anyone. She'd done it because she needed to breathe. The next morning, Principal Hargrove summoned her to his office. As Ami entered, she noticed Grant sitting stiffly in a chair opposite the desk, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrests. His father stood beside him, red-faced and fuming, while Ami's mother hovered anxiously near the doorway. Hargrove cleared his throat. "Miss Cole, Mr. Wheeler, I assume you're both aware of the gravity of yesterday's incident." Ami nodded silently, avoiding eye contact with anyone in the room. Out of the corner of her vision, she saw Grant glance at her briefly before looking away. There was shame in his expression, though whether it stemmed from embarrassment or regret, she couldn't tell. Sterling Academy prides itself on maintaining a safe environment for all students, Hargrove continued. However, acts of violence will not be tolerated. Effective immediately, Ms. Cole, you are suspended for 3 days pending further investigation. Her mother gasped audibly. Suspension? For defending herself? We must enforce our policies consistently, Hargrove replied coolly. Turning to Grant, he added, as for Mr. Wheeler, we believe counseling may help address any underlying issues contributing to his behavior. Ami bit her tongue to keep from shouting. Counseling? For shoving her into a locker and calling her a diversity hire? Meanwhile, she, the victim, was being punished. Back home later that afternoon, Ami retreated to the Underground Railroad Memorial Garden, a quiet space tucked away behind the library where few students ever ventured. She sat on a bench beneath the shade of an oak tree, staring at the plaque commemorating Harriet Tubman. Her uncle's face flashed in her mind, his warm smile, the stories he used to tell her about growing up in Lagos. He'd been deported during Trump's presidency, deemed non-essential, despite decades of living and working legally in America. His deportation papers still haunted her dreams sometimes, crisp and official, reducing his life to a series of bullet points. Ami buried her face in her hands, letting the tears come freely now. She thought about Kai, who'd idolized Bruce Lee since childhood and spent hours practicing kicks and punches in their garage. Would he have handled this better? Would he have flipped Grant onto the floor without hesitation, without guilt? She didn't know. All she knew was that survival wasn't supposed to feel like this. Like holding your breath underwater, hoping someone would throw you a lifeline before you drowned. As dusk settled over the garden, Ami finally stood, brushing dirt off her jeans. She glanced once more at the plaque honoring Tubman, drawing strength from the woman who had risked everything to lead others to freedom. Maybe she couldn't dismantle the system single-handedly. Maybe fighting back wouldn't change anything in the long run. But for now, she refused to let them silence her. Not completely. Taking a deep breath, Ami straightened her geli and walked back toward the main building, ready, or as ready as she'd ever be, to face whatever came next. The suspension letter sat on the kitchen table, its official Sterling Academy logo glaring up at Ami like an accusation. Her mother had taped it to the fridge earlier that morning, muttering in Yoruba under her breath about wasted sacrifices and broken promises. Ami avoided looking at it as she poured herself a bowl of cereal, but the weight of it pressed down on her anyway. She hadn't left the house since yesterday's meeting with Principal Hargrove. The shame and anger still burned hot inside her chest, a constant hum beneath her skin. She wanted to scream at someone, anyone, but instead, she stayed silent, letting the tension simmer until it felt unbearable. Her phone buzzed on the counter. It was Nia. "You okay?" "People are talking." Ami stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "What kind of talking?" Nia replied almost instantly. "Some kids think you're a badass. Others are calling you violent. And there's this whole conspiracy theory going around that Grant got off easy because his dad donates money to the school." Ami sighed, dropping her spoon into the bowl with a clatter. Of course there was a conspiracy theory. This was Sterling Academy, after all, a place where rumors spread faster than wildfire and truth was always negotiable. Later that afternoon, Ami found herself wandering aimlessly through Harvard Yard, her favorite escape when the walls of her own world felt too suffocating. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of fallen leaves, and students bustled past her, their arms laden with books or laptops. No one paid her any attention here. She blended seamlessly into the crowd, just another face among thousands. But today, something was different. A group of protesters stood near the John Harvard statue, holding signs that read #ScholarStrike and End Systemic Racism in Education. Their chants echoed across the yard. No justice, no peace. Reform the schools, release the beast. Ami hesitated, torn between curiosity and fear. Part of her wanted to turn away, to retreat back into the anonymity she'd sought here. But another part, a stronger, quieter voice, urged her closer. As she approached, one of the organizers noticed her and waved her over. "Hey," he said, handing her a flyer. "You going to the rally tomorrow?" Amara shook her head. "I didn't know there was one." He grinned, clearly pleased to have snagged someone new. "Yeah, we're organizing it at the football field. You should come. We need voices like yours." "Voices like hers?" Ami opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. What did that even mean? Was she supposed to be some sort of spokesperson now? She wasn't a leader, not really. She was just tired. Back home, Kai was waiting for her in the garage, practicing kicks against the heavy bag suspended from the ceiling. His movements were fluid, precise, every punch and kick executed with purpose. When he saw her standing in the doorway, he stopped mid-motion and wiped sweat from his brow. "So," he said, raising an eyebrow. "You gonna let them get away with this?" Ami shrugged, leaning against the doorframe. "What am I supposed to do, Kai? Fight the entire school administration by myself?" "You flipped Grant Wheeler onto his ass," Kai shot back, crossing his arms. "That's already more than most people would have done." "It shouldn't have happened in the first place," Ami snapped, her voice rising despite herself. "I shouldn't have to fight to exist here. I shouldn't have to prove my worth every single day while guys like him skate by on privilege and excuses." Kai studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he picked up his notebook from the workbench and flipped it open to a page filled with equations scrawled in messy handwriting. "What's this?" Ami asked, stepping closer. "Abolitionist math problems," Kai said with a smirk. He pointed to one equation. If every system of oppression collapses at a rate of X%, how long until we're free? Ami rolled her eyes, but she couldn't help smiling faintly. Leave it to Kai to turn rebellion into algebra. By the time night fell, the protests outside Sterling Academy had grown louder. Students gathered in clusters, holding candles and chanting slogans that reverberated through the empty halls. Someone handed Ami a megaphone during the rally, urging her to speak. She hesitated, clutching the device tightly as hundreds of eyes turned toward her. "I'm not good at speeches," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But I can tell you this, I didn't fight back because I wanted to win. I fought back because I needed to breathe. The crowd erupted into cheers, but Ami barely heard them. All she could focus on was the sea of faces staring up at her, some hopeful, others skeptical. For the first time, she realized just how many people were watching, not just her classmates, but teachers, parents, alumni. Everyone who ever doubted her ability to belong. The next day, emails began circulating among students and faculty. Someone had leaked correspondence between Principal Hargrove and the Board of Trustees, revealing damning evidence of bias within the administration. In one particularly incriminating message, Hargrove referred to Ami's scholarship as a liability and questioned whether students like her truly belonged at Sterling. The fallout was immediate. Parents called for Hargrove's resignation, while students staged walkouts demanding accountability. Protest signs appeared overnight on the Wall of Legends, the same wall that erased black athletes from history, calling out systemic racism and inequality. Ami tried to stay out of the spotlight, retreating to the Underground Railroad Memorial Garden whenever she needed space to think. But even there, she couldn't escape the whispers following her everywhere. One evening, as she sat on the bench beneath the oak tree, Grant Wheeler appeared unexpectedly. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing without his varsity jacket or sneer. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets, and his shoulders slumped forward like he carried the weight of the world. "Can we talk?" he asked hesitantly. Ami stiffened, gripping the edge of the bench. "What do you want, Grant?" He glanced around nervously, then sank onto the grass a few feet away. "Look, I know what I said to you. It was wrong. I was wrong. About everything." For a moment, Ami didn't respond. She simply watched him, searching for any trace of insincerity in his expression. When she found none, she exhaled slowly. "Why does it matter now?" she asked quietly. "Why say this to me after everything that's happened?" Grant hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Because I'm scared, okay? My dad's embezzlement scandal is blowing up, and everyone's turning on us. I thought being the golden boy would protect me, but it doesn't." "Nothing protects you." "Not really." Ami frowned, surprised by his vulnerability. She hadn't expected honesty from him, not like this. "And dyslexia," he added softly. "I never told anyone, but I struggle so much with reading. That's why I act like such a jerk sometimes. I guess I figured if I made enough noise, no one would notice how stupid I feel." Despite herself, Ami felt a pang of sympathy. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. They were both trapped in systems designed to crush them, albeit in very different ways. When she returned home later that night, Kai was waiting for her in the garage again. This time, however, he wasn't alone. A group of students from the protests had joined him, brainstorming ideas for next steps. "We're thinking about filing a lawsuit," one girl explained excitedly. "Against the school. For discrimination." Ami blinked, taken aback. "A lawsuit? Against Sterling?" "Yeah," Kai chimed in, grinning. "We figure if they won't listen to words, maybe they'll listen to lawyers." Ami sank onto a stool, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in momentum. Could they actually pull this off? Could they force Sterling to confront its own failures? As the night wore on, Ami drifted back to the plaque honoring Harriet Tubman. She traced the engraved letters with her fingertips, feeling the cool metal beneath her skin. Survival wasn't supposed to feel like this. Like fighting tooth and nail just to prove your existence mattered. But maybe survival wasn't enough anymore. Maybe it was time to demand something better. The morning sunlight streamed through the blinds of Ami's bedroom, casting long shadows across her desk. She stared at the stack of papers in front of her, notes from the protest organizers, legal documents outlining potential lawsuits, and a crumpled flyer advertising the upcoming student walkout. The air felt heavy, charged with anticipation, as if the entire school was holding its breath. But Ami couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her stomach. For days now, she'd been thrust into the spotlight, labeled everything from a hero to a villain. People expected her to lead, to speak, to fight, not just for herself but for every marginalized student who had ever walked Sterling Academy's hallowed halls. Yet all she wanted was to disappear. Her phone buzzed incessantly on the nightstand, notifications piling up faster than she could read them. Another group chat message lit up the screen. "You're speaking at the rally today, right?" Ami groaned, burying her face in her hands. Speaking wasn't part of the plan, at least not her plan. She hadn't asked for this role, hadn't volunteered to stand on stage and bare her soul to hundreds of strangers. But somehow, it had become inevitable. By midday, the football field was packed. Students spilled out onto the bleachers, their faces painted with slogans like #ScholarStrike and Reform or Remove. Teachers lingered nervously along the sidelines, unsure whether to intervene or let the moment unfold. Even parents had shown up, some clutching signs of support, others glaring disapprovingly at the chaos. Kai stood near the edge of the crowd, arms crossed and eyes scanning the scene with quiet intensity. He caught Ami's gaze and gave her a small nod, his way of saying, "You've got this." Principal Hargrove arrived shortly after, flanked by members of the Board of Trustees. His expression was unreadable, though his clenched jaw betrayed a flicker of anxiety. He approached the makeshift podium set up near midfield, where Nia and a few other organizers were waiting. "Students," Hargrove began, his voice amplified over the loudspeakers. "I understand your concerns, but disrupting school activities is not the answer. Let's address these issues constructively." Before he could finish, someone in the crowd shouted, "Zero tolerance for racism." The chant spread quickly, drowning out Hargrove's words. Ami watched silently from the sidelines, her heart pounding. She didn't move when Nia gestured for her to step forward, didn't budge when the chants turned into calls for her name. And then Kai appeared beside her, nudging her gently. "Go," he said firmly. "They're ready." Taking a deep breath, Ami stepped toward the podium. The noise faded slightly as she climbed the platform, her ghillie catching the sunlight like a beacon. Hundreds of pairs of eyes locked onto her, expectant yet uncertain. "I never wanted any of this," she started, her voice trembling. "I didn't flip Grant Wheeler onto that gym floor because I wanted to make a statement. I did it because I needed to breathe." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Ami pressed on. "This school talks about diversity and inclusion, but those are just buzzwords unless they mean something. Unless they protect the students they claim to value." She paused, gripping the edges of the podium tightly. Her mind flashed back to her mother working triple shifts, her uncle deported under policies cloaked in merit-based lies, her own panic attacks hidden behind bathroom stall doors. "We deserve better," she said finally, her voice steadying. "Not just apologies or empty promises, but real change. And if Sterling can't give us that, then maybe we don't belong here." The crowd erupted into cheers, chanting her name over and over again. Ami stepped back, overwhelmed by the swell of emotion around her. She searched the sea of faces until she found Kai, who grinned proudly and gave her 2 thumbs up. Later that evening, tensions reached a boiling point. As students dispersed from the rally, Grant Wheeler cornered Ami in the parking lot, his fists clenched and jaw tight. Without thinking, Kai darted between them, his stance protective and unwavering. "Back off," Kai warned, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You don't get to talk to her." Grant hesitated, clearly startled by Kai's presence. "I just want to say." "No," Kai interrupted, raising a hand. "You've said enough already. Leave her alone." Someone in the crowd pulled out their phone, capturing the confrontation on camera. Within minutes, the video went viral, showing Kai standing tall against Grant, his martial arts training evident in every deliberate movement. That night, Ami sat cross-legged on her bed, scrolling through social media posts dissecting the day's events. Some praised Kai as a loyal protector, others criticized him for escalating the situation further. Meanwhile, Sterling Academy scrambled to respond, issuing vague statements about fostering dialogue and promoting unity. Her mother knocked softly on the door before entering, carrying a tray of jollof rice and plantains. She placed it on Ami's desk without a word, then sat down beside her on the bed. "You're strong, my daughter," her mother said quietly. "Stronger than you realize. But strength doesn't mean carrying everything alone." Ami leaned into her mother's embrace, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'm scared, Mama. What if nothing changes? What if we fight and still lose?" Her mother kissed the top of her head. "Then we build something new. Something better. Survival isn't just about enduring, it's about creating space for ourselves to thrive." The next morning, Sterling offered Ami reinstatement as valedictorian if she retracted her complaints and apologized publicly. She read the letter twice, her hands shaking with rage. Then, without hesitation, she tore it into pieces and tossed it into the trash. In the garage later that night, Ami burned Stanford's acceptance letter in a metal bucket, watching the flames consume the glossy paper. Beside her, Kai practiced kicks against the heavy bag, muttering under his breath, "We don't win by their rules." As the fire crackled and died, Ami realized she wasn't fighting to fit into a broken system anymore. She was fighting to dismantle it, and maybe, just maybe, rebuild something stronger in its place. The morning of graduation dawned gray and overcast, the sky heavy with clouds that threatened rain. Ami stood in front of the mirror in her bedroom, adjusting her geli one last time. The fabric shimmered faintly under the dim light, a deep indigo embroidered with intricate gold patterns, an homage to her Nigerian heritage and a quiet rebellion against the sea of pastel dresses she knew would fill the auditorium. Her mother hovered anxiously nearby, smoothing imaginary wrinkles on Ami's white blouse and navy skirt. "You look beautiful," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "So proud of you." Ami forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. She wasn't sure what she felt anymore, pride, anger, exhaustion. Maybe all three. Today marked the end of something, though whether it was closure or simply another beginning remained unclear. The Sterling Academy auditorium buzzed with anticipation as students filed in, dressed in their finest attire. Parents snapped photos from the sidelines, while teachers exchanged nervous glances, unsure how the ceremony would unfold given recent events. The atmosphere was tense, electric, a powder keg waiting for a spark. When Principal Hargrove took the stage to deliver his opening remarks, the room fell silent. His usual confident demeanor seemed strained, his words carefully chosen to avoid provoking further dissent. "Today," he began, "we celebrate not just academic achievement, but resilience. Each of you has overcome challenges unique to your journey, and we honor that perseverance." Ami clenched her fists beneath her gown, resisting the urge to roll her eyes. Resilience? Was that supposed to be some kind of backhanded compliment? She glanced at Kai sitting in the audience beside their mother, his expression unreadable but undoubtedly skeptical. As names were called and diplomas handed out, the tension in the room grew palpable. When Grant Wheeler approached the stage, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some clapped politely, others remained silent, glaring pointedly at him. Grant kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone as he accepted his diploma. Finally, it was Ami's turn. Her name echoed through the auditorium, met with a mix of applause and murmurs. She walked slowly to the stage, each step deliberate, feeling the weight of every pair of eyes on her. As she reached the podium, Principal Hargrove leaned toward her, offering a tentative smile. "Miss Cole," he whispered, "if you'd like to say a few words." Ami hesitated, then shook her head firmly. "No thank you," she replied, loud enough for those nearby to hear. Without waiting for further prompting, she accepted her diploma and stepped aside, leaving the spotlight empty behind her. The audience erupted into uncertain applause, unsure whether to cheer or remain silent. Ami returned to her seat, her heart pounding wildly. She hadn't planned to speak, not officially, but as she sat there listening to the remainder of the ceremony, she realized she still had something to say. During the closing remarks, Ami rose abruptly from her seat and moved toward the microphone at the center of the stage. Gasps rippled through the crowd as she adjusted the mic stand to her height and faced the audience. "I'm not valedictorian," she began, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "And I don't want to be. Because this title doesn't define me, and neither does this school." She paused, letting her words sink in. "For years, I tried to fit into a system that wasn't built for people like me. I studied harder, worked longer, smiled wider, all to prove I belonged here. But no matter what I did, there was always someone ready to remind me I didn't." Her gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on Grant before shifting to the board of trustees seated in the front row. "This isn't about me or any one person. It's about a system designed to exclude, to erase. And until we dismantle that system, nothing will truly change." The room was eerily silent now, everyone holding their breath as Ami continued. "So today, I choose to walk away, not because I've given up, but because I refuse to play by rules that were never meant for me to win." With that, she stepped away from the mic, leaving the stage without looking back. The crowd erupted into cheers, though they were mixed with murmurs of confusion and disapproval. Some students stood, clapping fervently, while others remained seated, stunned. After the ceremony, Ami found herself surrounded by classmates who wanted to congratulate her, or argue with her. Nia hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You did it," she whispered. "You actually did it." Kai appeared moments later, grinning ear to ear. "Told you they couldn't break you," he said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders, but Ami barely heard them. Her mind was elsewhere, replaying the image of the board members' shocked expressions as she rejected the valedictorian title. For once, she felt free, not completely, not forever, but free enough to breathe. That evening, Ami and Kai trained together in their garage dojo, practicing moves that blended self-defense with defiance. Posters of abolitionists and martial artists covered the walls, reminders of the legacy they hoped to carry forward. The flickering fluorescent light cast long shadows across the space, illuminating sweat-drenched faces and determined eyes. "We don't win by their rules," Kai muttered between punches, echoing the mantra they'd repeated countless times before. Ami nodded, matching his rhythm blow for blow. As they sparred, Ami thought about the future. Not just hers, but the collective future of everyone fighting to exist within systems that sought to erase them. Could a system built on exclusion ever reward truth? She didn't know. Maybe it couldn't. But maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe the point was to keep fighting anyway. To create new paths where none existed before. To build something stronger, better, truer. In the final moments of the chapter, Ami paused mid-kick, lowering her leg as she caught her reflection in the cracked mirror propped against the wall. Her belly was slightly askew, her cheeks flushed from exertion, but her eyes burned with resolve. Survival wasn't performance. It was revolution, and revolutions didn't happen overnight.